Okay, and we're back. So, beyond the ideological impasse on Taiwan, there were a number of other issues that created problems and bogged down the talks at an official level in the late 1960s and early 1970s. For one was Cambodia, a neutral country in the Vietnam War, found its prince ousted from power by a pro-United States faction that was eventually displaced by the Khmer Rouge. Sihanouk was granted sanctuary in China, where his presence and his anger at the United States now worked against the two countries coming to terms with each other. Meanwhile, during that same period, domestic concerns, such as Mao Zedong's struggle with Marshal Lin, pushed foreign policy to the back burner for much of the year of 1970. Rapprochement regained momentum through a return to unofficial channels that fall, which suited Mao. By then, he believed that the Chinese people would only accept and embrace the United States if this turnabout appeared to be spontaneous, organic, and genuine. It had to look like a groundswell of forces were pushing the two nations toward each other, rather than a deliberate planning of this new partnership manufactured by elites in Washington and Beijing. Here he was gifted an opportunity through an old friend from the United States, Edgar Snow. Snow, pictured here on this slide with Mao Zedong, had traveled to the CCP's base of power in North China in the 1930s, following the Long March. Living with Mao and the other revolutionaries of this generation led to the publication of his book, Red Star Over China, a national bestseller in the United States that projected an image of Chinese communists as agrarian patriots, akin to America's own revolutionary generation, in the form of Jefferson and Washington that had fought against the British. Snow remained a friend and even an apologist for Mao and communism in China into the Cold War, but had been rebuffed several times in asking for a chance to visit in recent years. Now, Mao not only granted his request, but made him guest of honor for the National Day parades and demonstrations in October 1970. He was granted unprecedented access to the aging chairman for a lengthy interview, which was essentially an open letter to the Nixon administration and U.S. public. In it, Mao expressed his willingness to personally receive Nixon in Beijing for these talks and called for the slowing of the Cultural Revolution and the need for radicalism in China. Beyond acting as a messenger, Snow's presence in Tiananmen Square that fall was intended to prepare the Chinese psychologically for relations with the United States. Snow was a friend of China, who embodied a time when nominally the U.S. and China fought a common enemy, the Japanese, in the Second World War. He was nostalgic and romantic, and evoking Snow as a symbol of Sino-American history and friendship bypassed the outright hostility and friction of the Cold War years. The much more famous and far more organic moment, though, that paved the way for the Nixon visit came with the advent of ping-pong diplomacy. An American ping-pong team in Tokyo for the World Championships had several unplanned, accidental encounters with the Chinese team, who were the world's best players, including the young Glenn Cohen, who mistakenly boarded the Chinese team's bus after a match. He was embarrassed and afraid, fearing that he caused an international incident, but the tensions were erased by the grace of Zhang Zedong, a three-time world champion who rose and gave Cohen the gift of his silk scarf. The next day, the 19-year-old American returned to reciprocate Zhang's kindness with an ironic token of Americana. He gave him a Beatles t-shirt. Party officials accompanying the Chinese team quickly telegraphed Mao and the foreign ministry a summary of what was happening at the World Championships. Mao would dwell on the matter before waking in the middle of the night and telling the foreign minister to send a message that the Americans should be given an invitation to come to the mainland for an extended tour and a series of exhibitions with the Chinese team. The Americans accepted, and it unleashed a tidal wave of excitement and curiosity in both countries. The exhibitions were carried live on national television inside China, where the young Americans projected the exact sort of image Mao and the CCP needed to remold the public's perception of the United States. They were respectful of the Chinese team, they paid homage to their great talent and superior skill, they were energetic, innocent, and humorous. It was a propaganda coup won by exploiting a rare opportunity. Ping-pong diplomacy, though, also speaks to an idea that would be embedded later in the Shanghai Communique, the call for people-to-people exchanges, sending scholars, dancers, writers, athletes, and professionals to promote mutual understanding and goodwill. True enough, one can make the case that especially as Sino-American rapprochement later stalled, Nixon would be embroiled in the mid-1970s by the Watergate scandal and his impeachment, and the confrontation over Mao's succession when he died in 1976. These things all disrupted any progress between the two nations. The bedrock, though, of Chinese-American relationship has been created since that time by ordinary people outside of governments, through education, through universities, through food, art, tourism, and immigration. These things, all like the ping pong teams, turned ideas like Sino-American friendship and cooperation from concepts and diplomacy into a social and political reality. The final steps, in preparing for Nixon's visit to China then after that, were completed at an official level, with Nixon's top advisor, Henry Kissinger, making secret trips to meet with Zhou Enlai in the foreign ministry. Aided by Pakistan now, instead of Cambodia or Poland as a mediator, the two nations put aside the issue of Taiwan in return for an agreement that pushed for recognition of each side's policy and interests. Essentially, this was a major success in terms of political tactics. Both administrations decided that the resolving of the Taiwan issue would be something that future generations and leaders can handle, while they reap the rewards of breaking through on this impasse by establishing normal relations. In essence, they punted an issue that they couldn't solve down the line for future politicians to deal with the headache, while they took all the credit for reestablishing relations between the two nations. It was a great success. In return for China's help with North Vietnam and peaceful gestures toward Taipei, the U.S. also agreed to begin withdrawing down its military footprint in South Vietnam, easing tensions in the region. For a time, the Nixon visit revived the public image of Mao as a cunning, crafty leader, unpredictable, willing to take great risks in order to secure China's place as a power in the international community. The act of Nixon and his American press corps entourage coming to China, pictured listening attentively to Mao pontificate on world issues in his own study, performed a contemporary dance of tributary and emperor. It made China look like it was in the position of power. Still, there were consequences to this reversal as well. China, at the beginning of the Sino-Soviet split in the early 1960s, staked its claim to world leadership within the communist movement by being the more aggressive of the two nations in supporting leftist movements around the world and calling for revolution. In reconciling with the United States, leftist movements around the world now felt that Mao and Beijing were betraying radical cause and genuine communism. In essence, Mao was accused of having sold out, and Chinese communism and its theories for revolution and social engineering were now seen as morally bankrupt. In truth, it would be Mao's eventual successor, too, that would capitalize most on the potential of relations with the United States, and especially its allies like Japan, using both as a massive reservoir of financial and human capital for the pursuit of what Zhou Enlai and Deng Xiaoping would call the four modernizations. Okay, so this is our talk on Sino-American rapprochement. Again, I invite you to send questions, to attend the Zoom meeting, to reach out in any way that you can, to let me know if there's anything I can do to help you have success this semester. And as always, I wish you to be well and happy and healthy this week. Bye.